1953, that was the last time unemployment for women in this country was as low as it is now. Just one of the remarkable numbers that show how the Trump presidency, as promised, is helping working people. Of course, elsewhere in the media today, it's all Russia, Russia, Russia. Not here, though. We are America, America, America. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Tonight, we'll bring you more of those incredible economic numbers you may have missed. And I'll debate the president's trade strategy with Kennedy. Will tariffs hurt working Americans or help them? Also tonight, we connect the dots between John Brennan's pompous and self-regarding attack on President Trump, the bureaucracy's efforts to overturn the Brexit vote in the UK, and this week's dramatic events in Italy, where the anti-EU nominee for a top government job was vetoed by the unelected president. Will populist victories face an establishment counter-revolution everywhere? And then, a special focus just days before the California primary. Is loony left Governor Jerry Brown killing the Golden State? Tommy Lahren, Antonio Sabato Jr., former Democratic Governor Gray Davis, and Congressman Brad Sherman are all here for a live debate on immigration, the economy, and the poverty and homelessness crippling California. But first, let's get to the big story, the transformation of our economy under President Trump. Of course, you wouldn't know it from the rest of the media, who've been obsessing all day about a leaked legal memo about the Russia investigation. But jobs, economic growth, incomes, these are the things that affect you and your family. And it's what the populist revolution is all about. So here's another couple of numbers that I haven't seen covered anywhere else. 5.4%. That's close to the lowest unemployment rate on record for workers without a high school diploma. Or how about this? 10% is the rise in weekly earnings in the first quarter of this year for Americans without a high school diploma. 0.5% is the rise in earnings for college graduates. That is clear evidence that the Trump economy is helping exactly the people the president promised to help, those left behind by decades of elitist policies. Joining me now to discuss all this, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy is here, and we're so pleased.
So nice to see you in beautiful Los Angeles.
So a lot of people in the 2016 campaign said, despite some of the things that President Trump says or does they may not be comfortable with, they were going to back him precisely because of this big issue of the economy. At least he'll get the economy moving.
Yes.
It really feels like that's what's happening.
And, you know, there's always a disconnect between the way Washington sees the economy and the way families see the economy. And it's interesting because populism doesn't necessarily have to mean statism or groupthink. And it's really been about individuals and families who have looked at the landscape and two parties that seem to be molding into one. And they've asked themselves for years, what's in it for me? You know, if you talk about a windfall on Wall Street, and for some people, that's great. You know, for investors who have millions and billions of dollars, that's fantastic. I don't begrudge them their wealth. And for people who have pensions or 401ks, and that sort of solidifies their retirement, that's really great. But for, you know, just under half of the rest of Americans who don't have any money in the stock market, you know, those metrics don't necessarily apply to them. So what they want is someone who thinks in an unorthodox way that is actually going to shake things up and more importantly, hold people accountable who have been abusing their power and forgetting about them. And it's interesting because when you hear Hillary Clinton and President Obama and Ben Rhodes talk about the failure of the 2016 election, it was their failure to, you know, in very basic terms, look at the problems that these people had and address them practically.
Well, this is the thing. So Ben Rhodes, you mentioned, I mean, he was out, he's got this book coming out or come out, I don't know where it is, but he had this quote in it, which I thought really spoke to this cluelessness in the elite, where he's talking about exactly what you were just saying, why they lost, and Obama musing on whether the reason that he was rejected and Trump came in, who's so different from him, was all to do with race, whether the fact is that I was 10 or 20 years too early, Obama said. They think it's all about race, but actually it's this fact that the elitist policies that they followed, and let's be fair, the previous administration, George W. Bush as well, just left so many people behind. It's nothing to do with race, it's to do with the fact that the economy wasn't working for working people.
And if you look at those similarities, you know, you have two big spending presidents who really felt that they could just apply their world worldview and make people's lives better, whether it's starting wars in the Middle East or having, massive domestic spending programs, that actually made people's lives worse. It made it harder to start a business. And for a lot of people, that meant dropping out of the workforce entirely. So for a lot of the Obama campaign, you had employment numbers that were going up. Unemployment was going down a little bit, but it wasn't as rosy of a picture because you had a massive part of the labor force that simply wasn't participating at all. I mean, they had completely given up.
And that's what's changing now. And actually, the people, they go on about the 1% and the tax cut that benefited the rich. But actually, the people who are really benefiting right now, as some of those numbers showed, were the people at the bottom coming into the labor market for the first time and their wages going up. I just want to ask you, though, in terms of looking ahead, what do you think the impact will be of this trade strategy that the president's pursuing?
It depends what his long-term goal is. In the short term, it gets people on both sides really riled up. And for the free market economists, I understand while they're nervous because they know economic protectionism doesn't work long-term. But if the president is using it as a short-term strategy, if this is a negotiation tool to recraft NAFTA in a way that he sees as more amenable to the United States and to have more favorable trade with the EU and Canada and Mexico, and it is something short term, and it does work out, and it does eventually lead to more U.S. economic growth, then that's ultimately good. If it's a long-term strategy and we're really going to shut down our trade borders, that's going to be problematic for just the people you were talking about, because it means that there are a lot of goods that can be much more expensive if there is, in fact, a protracted trade war. Things like steel and aluminum go into making a bunch of other things. And if those things are more expensive because of mutual tariffs, that's going to be a big issue and cut into people's spending power with inflation also on the rise.
I really agree with that analysis. I think that, but we should believe what he says. He says, I'm for free trade, but also fair trade. I think it's the beginning of a negotiation. I just want to switch to one more topic, because this is something that really kind of got me riled up this week. It was John Brennan, who's out with this extremely aggressive attack on President Trump. Let's look what he said earlier. I think it was on Thursday or Friday about the president.
Mr. Trump is going to promote his narrative. He certainly is going to continue to try to discredit the FBI and the CIA and others. But I think, make no mistake about it, the American justice system, I think, is going to prevail in this endeavor to get to the bottom of who might have been collaborating and working with foreign actors to try to undermine the integrity of the election.
I mean, collaborating and working with foreign actors to undermine the election. I mean, hang on a second. It was you, John Brennan. He was the one that got involved with the dossier, using a British spy from another country with the Russians. I mean, I can't believe the arrogance of these people.
Yeah, and then, the FBI kind of employing Christopher Steele for a certain amount of time. And we also, it's funny because I think John Brennan, like James Comey, they think they're saviors of these gilded institutions, but the opacity there makes it very difficult for us to hold them accountable. And what he's doing, this defensive posturing that you've seen from him and James Comey, all it looks like they're doing is trying to shield themselves from any accountability. And that's one of the first things that we talked about tonight. And, the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency, it should be very troubling, not just for people who are defenders of the president, but for people who value civil liberties in this country. And I think his attacks are very small-minded. I think they're incredibly short-sighted, and they do very little to improve the perceptions of the intelligence community. And if that's what he's trying to do, he needs to come up with a better strategy. I don't think that's what he's trying to do. I think he hates the president. I think he's opposed to him politically, and he's doing whatever he can, hiding behind his invisible shield, to harm the president in any way possible.
I totally agree. And it's symbolic of this ruling elite that just can't believe that President Trump won, that Brexit happened. Now in Italy, we're seeing it all over the place. We'll get to that later. Kennedy, thank you so much.
So nice to see you,
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
All right, after the break, the big debate. As the establishment Democrats push California as a model for the rest of the country, we ask, is Governor Jerry Brown killing California? Don't go away. Welcome back to The Next Revolution, live from Los Angeles with the California primary less than 2 days away. The left are talking about the Californization of America, arguing that the Golden State should be a model for the rest of the country. Is that a promise or a threat? Tonight, we debate whether America should want to be more like California by examining in detail the record of the outgoing governor, Jerry Brown. We'll be looking at all the big issues: immigration, the economy and budget, and poverty in our special debate, which includes a former governor of the state, as we ask, is Jerry Brown killing California? You can join in at home. Please send us your thoughts at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. We'll feature some of them later in the debate. Now, let's start with immigration. Here's Anita Vogel with the facts.
Well, hi there, Steve. In the ongoing debate over immigration in this country, there's really no question California has become ground zero. The Public Policy Institute says there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S., more than 2 million of them in California. That's 6% of the state's population. Nearly 1 in 10 California workers, according to research, is an undocumented immigrant. Last year, Governor Jerry Brown declared California the first sanctuary state in the nation. So what does that mean? Depending on the jurisdiction, among other things, it limits federal authorities from deporting accused and oftentimes convicted criminals. It prohibits sharing information between local law enforcement and federal authorities on immigration and potentially other crimes. And it protects illegal immigrants from being asked about their immigration status. Now, the Justice Department is suing the state, alleging obstruction of federal immigration enforcement. 21 cities and 2 counties are also voicing opposition to the law, either with friend of the court briefs, resolutions, or individual lawsuits. So what is the cost to California to harbor so many illegal immigrants? A whopping $23 billion a year. And now there is currently an effort underway in California to become the first state to offer full health coverage to undocumented adults, potentially costing California taxpayers an additional $250 million. Steve.
Thanks, Anita. Okay, let's get the debate underway. With me tonight, Fox News contributor Tommy Lauren, California congressional candidate Republican Antonio Sabato Jr., California Congressman Democrat Brad Sherman, and former California Governor Democrat Gray Davis. Antonio, let's start with you.
Yes,
this
sir.
immigration issue, it's got to be top of many people's concerns here in
Absolutely.
the state. It also feels like for Democrats, this is the heart of the resistance against Donald Trump. They want to export this to the rest of the country. What does that mean?
Well, let's talk about, there's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. I came here legally in 1985 in search for a better future, and I did it legally. So now if you're here illegally, that's against federal law. So basically it's against our Constitution. So we shouldn't be allowing people to come here illegally and take advantage of us, American citizens. We're paying taxes every single day. And the Democrats on the other side always want to sell this, they want to sell a car with no engine pretty much. And this has got to stop, and it's going to end this November.
This sanctuary state position that Governor Brown has set out seems to be a real shift from when he presented himself as a reasonable, moderate Democrat. Feels like he's completely pandering to his base on this issue, isn't he?
No, it's Donald Trump who's pandering to his base, splitting up families that have been here for 20 and 30 years. Naturally,
President Obama did that too with the deportations, if that's what you're talking about.
President Obama pushed for, what we need is comprehensive immigration reform.
Agreed.
A lot of Republicans have signed the discharge petition to force Ryan to do what he doesn't want to do, and that's bring comprehensive immigration to the floor. And if that happens, we'll have a reasonable settlement to all this. And instead, we flan the flavors. We say that immigrants are rapists and murderers, and that's exactly what he said. He said there were 3 categories.
Wait, one at a time. One at a time. Just though, how can any reasonable person? So let's just ask the question this way, right? I understand the argument about not using the criminal justice system to penalize responsible people who are here doing a good job, even if they're illegally. I get that the priority should be criminals. But there's no prioritization for Democrats. They're not allowing cooperation even for sex offenders and violent criminals. How do you defend that?
First of all, we deport those and aid in the deporting of those who've been convicted of serious crimes. But second, if we get comprehensive immigration reform, we won't have to have this discussion. It's Republicans who have refused to allow us to debate it on the floor. And when they sign the discharge petition, when they destroy the bottleneck, when they rise up against their own leadership, we'll solve this problem.
Tommy.
And again, I'm happy that you brought up the issue of compassion, because at what point in the state of California or in the United States of America as a whole do we start having compassion for everyday legal Americans that bust their butt day in and day out? Where's the compassion for those folks? Because priority number one in California for Democrats is illegal immigrants. How do you explain that to people like me, people like Antonio, and those that are out there trying to make a living?
I'd like to get the
why do you define our priority?
Governor Davis in on this one.
Well, first, let's take a step back. Look what immigrants did in 2017, according to the Fortune 500 report. Almost 50% of the businesses in that report were started by immigrants or the children of immigrants. And you look at the top 35, 57% of those were started by immigrants.
I don't think anyone is challenging that. None of the people are challenging that, including the president. What they're challenging
but we need to look
is
at
the
both sides of the
illegality
ledger
that's involved in forbidding the law enforcement from cooperating over people who are here illegally.
Jerry Brown's insisted that 800 crimes be written into this new law so that local law enforcement must comply with federal requests on any serious violent crime. 800 crimes. So are there a few exceptions that you can complain about? Maybe. But this is a fair compromise. Remember, the state has one obligation: to reduce crime. To get crime solved, you need immigrants telling you who did it, and I'll be a witness.
Okay.
If they don't participate, crime doesn't go down.
Do you see this as a crime, this sanctuary state, sanctuary city policy as a crime reduction?
The liberal socialists in Sacramento, they call themselves Democrats now, but they're not, they're socialists, have run the state into the ground for 30 years. So you can blame it on the Republicans all you want.
Immigration, though.
Immigration alone. Now, how come we can't allow ICE to come in and take care of business in our state? They're not allowed. We are a sanctuary state. I can't believe we were talking about this. We got to be a sanctuary country for the American people once and for all. We're talking about immigrants. We're talking about everybody else but Americans. Americans pay taxes. Americans want to go back to work. We got to start protecting the American people.
Okay, Congressman, I totally hear your point about the need for reform. But my question is, in the absence of that, you can't just throw everything up and say, well, let's just make a point against President Trump and thumb our nose at him, and at the same time put communities in danger, because you're
you
not
provide for the deportation of those convicted of 800 different crimes. You are not putting communities at risk.
But what happened in Oakland? With that mayor, Libby Schaaf?
She made an announcement when they were coming after families who hadn't been convicted of anything, breaking them apart, having American citizen kids without their parents, and she said no to that. But once we get comprehensive immigration reform, then California will fully cooperate. Why are we trying to fan the flames of disagreement when what we need is comprehensive immigration reform?
I think the reason that, because a lot of people are upset about what's going on, right?
I hear this comprehensive immigration reform time and time again from the Republicans and the Democrats. We can all agree that we need it. However, with Republicans, at least Trump supporters, most of us believe that that begins with border enforcement. And the Democrats have told us time and time again, we don't want a wall, we don't want border enforcement, we don't want mechanisms that work. We want to protect DACA, we want to protect dreamers, we want to protect families. What about the border? What about legal immigrants?
Last word. Governor, I just want to ask you a very specific question, sorry, just at the end, because we're running out of time. This is a big question that everyone's so concerned about, which is illegal. It's not about legal immigration. It's about America's built on immigrants. We get that. Illegal immigration. Are you happy with the level of illegal immigration in California today?
I would like to see none of it. But let me show you the progress that has been made. In the 1990s...
How can you support Brown?
I'm giving these statistics. In the 1990s, 2.4 million people crossed into California illegally. In the first 10 years of this century, 1.8 million. The last 10 years, 750,000. So this problem is going down. Plus, the majority of those immigrants in the last 7 years have been from Southeast Asia. Not
but
Mexico.
The costs are going up. I mean, if you look, we're out of time.
The problem is solving itself.
Hang on a second. Do you know how much? The biggest expenditure for the state of California is what? It's Medicaid, right? Do you know what?
No, education.
That's not correct, actually.
Yeah, we're number 42 out of 50 states in education. Listen.
No, I'm talking about the amount of the spending of that budget. And just to take one example of how much this is a problem that affects every taxpayer in California, do you know how much of that budget, for example, with births in hospital, is now devoted to illegal immigrants who shouldn't be here according to the law?
Absolutely.
I don't know the answer to that, but I want to tell you one thing.
Well, take a guess. I'm asking you to take a guess.
I have no idea. But let
me talk about taxpayers for a second.
Hang on,
Let's talk about taxpayers.
Please, this is when it gets to the real detail. Do you know how much of the state's health budget is spent proportionally on births for the children of illegal immigrants?
What I do know is that we increased the burden of debt.
Do you know the answer to that question?
I don't. Do you know the answer to what is the?
It sounds like a no, and you're pontificating.
No. Why won't you answer my question? And
because
that is,
I'm the host of the show, and I asked you a question which you clearly don't know the answer to.
I'll
tell the audience the answer. Hang on a second. I'll tell the audience the answer. It's a third. It's 29%. It's nearly 30% of the budget of California's biggest expenditure going on the children of people who shouldn't be here. That's the problem, and no one's dealing with it as far as I can make out. Sorry. Coming up, California boasts the world's 5th largest economy, but who's really winning and who's losing out? And if the California model is the Democrats' plan for the rest of America, what does that mean for you?
The Deep State exposed.
America deserves answers. It's something you will only hear on this show.
Sarah Sanders and Mark Levin have must-see reactions.
Welcome back to this Next Revolution special. Is Jerry Brown killing California? Besides immigration, the top issue for many Americans is the economy. So, just what has happened to California's economy over the past decade with Jerry Brown? Here's Anita Vogel with more.
Well, thanks, Steve. The California dream, a good life for the average middle-class family, including a 3-bedroom house and maybe a swimming pool, used to be attainable. But today, that dream has become far too expensive. California is the world's 5th largest economy, but it's ranked highest in the country in individual income tax, 13.3%, sales tax, 7.25%, and the gas tax, 50 cents per gallon. That's the second highest behind Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, the state is gearing up for a pension crisis. Public employee pension systems have huge gaps called unfunded liabilities between what they have in assets and what they need to pay their retirees. The California Public Employees Retirement System, called CalPERS, is the nation's largest pension trust fund. In 2016, CalPERS was only 69% funded. That's a $168 billion unfunded liability. Making up the difference means more contributions from public agencies like police, fire, and school districts. Critics argue that although Governor Brown did pass a moderate version of pension reform back in 2012, he could have done more. And that even though he is known to sound like a fiscal conservative, recently telling California cities he wouldn't be bailing them out with regard to pension costs, many say his spending record looks more progressive, like expanding Medi-Cal, which cost the state $1.3 billion, and recently striking a deal with the prison guard union for a huge salary increase. Meantime, over the last decade, major companies have announced plans to leave the state with lower corporate taxes. Toyota, Carl's Jr., and Occidental Petroleum, just a few businesses to leave. And roughly 1 million residents have also left California for other states. Most headed to Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, where the taxes and home prices are a lot lower. Steve?
Thank you, Anita. Now, Governor Davis, I'm sorry to put this indelicately, but a lot of people blame you for this pensions catastrophe with State Bill, 400 that you cited in 1999, that handed out these incredibly generous pension arrangements, early retirement and so on for the vast numbers of public sector employees. Do you feel responsibility for this fiscal crisis that is hitting California?
If I had to do over again, Steve, I wouldn't do it. However, I want to point this out. In 2007, the CalPERS had 110% overfunding. And so the problem did not occur till the Great Recession. And that recession involved a lot of fraud, subprime loans, people giving loans without even any documentation, not even signing the documents. So it was not just a recession, it was fraud plus a recession. And that really hit the pension funds badly. But I do think you're going to see some progress, not so much from the governor's reforms, but they're a good start. But I think the courts are going to step in. 2 appellate courts have said California can adjust a pension for that portion of someone's employment that has not yet been fulfilled. In other words, you're going to work for 20 years, you work for 10. You can't touch that part of the pension, but you can adjust the pension as long as it's reasonable.
But the idea
and that's going to the Supreme Court within about 6 months.
Okay, but the idea that California is a model for the rest of the country.
It's a model in this regard. There's nothing like Silicon Valley. That is.
Well, we'll get. You know what? We'll get to that in the next part of the debate, because I do want to look at this question of who's really benefiting from this booming economy that certainly is going on in some parts of California. But Tommy, I just wanted to get you in here. I mean, you're living here now. I mean, what's extraordinary to me is that when you just look at the data, I'm sure the Congressman will challenge me, but I'm going to put out the data that we've got. And that need to refer to, which is that you've got this very big, you've got the highest taxes. Anyway, you've got people leaving the state, and yet services are being cut in many areas. I mean, it feels like this is really incompetent economically.
Well, how do you have the 5th largest economy and be struggling like this? How are everyday Americans struggling like this? As you mentioned, how are our services going down but the prices are going up? How do we have high income taxes, high income inequality? How do we have the homelessness? How do we have this issue? How is the state in this place? This is a great place to be, but it's been destroyed for far too long. I don't know, moving from Texas to California, I don't understand how we could be in this bad a shape, but the answer is perhaps sitting across from us.
So, Congressman, would you say that California is a good model for the USA, economically speaking?
We're top in public health, top in life expectancy, top in low mortality. We're top in entrepreneurship. We're top in colleges. We're top in science.
Why is everyone leaving?
We're growing faster than the Trump states.
The illegal immigrants are growing, but where are the Californians going?
We have more legal immigrants and more American-born citizens than any other state by far. They can live in any one of 50 states. They choose, as you chose, this one because it's the best. That's because we have the best science. We have the largest budget surplus, $9 billion budget surplus. Texas has like a $9 billion deficit. And as to those unfunded pension liabilities, other states have much larger percentage public
But if the budget
unfunded.
is in such good shape,
Yes.
why are there spending cuts hitting schools and universities and parks and recreation, you name it, right across the board, apart from pay for public sector workers? You see spending cuts.
Not in higher education.
Sorry, the University of California system is being cut.
He's added $6 billion to the University of California and the state college system. And by the way, the key to Silicon Valley is really the greatest public university system in the world. 10 UC campuses.
Which is unaffordable for most Californians.
Talk about the rest of the state.
$6 billion. $6 billion has been added in the last 4 years.
Yeah, let's talk about the rest of the state. There's a lot of other cities that are falling apart. San Francisco is ruined. Los Angeles, we have 10,000 people living on the streets.
We'll get to that
homeless.
next.
I mean, we're talking about a lot of stuff that don't make any sense.
But it's interesting to me that Jerry Brown presents himself as this sort of model of fiscal rectitude.
No,
but when you
not
get
good
behind
the Democrats are good at one thing, spending money they don't have. And we have to pay for it. And also they make our streets in our neighborhood very unsafe. Their policies like AB 109, prison early release, that was a mess. Prop 47 and 57. This November, we have a choice to bring some leadership in this state and bring it to the golden state that it was many years ago.
Do you want to live with the crime rate that we had under Republican governors?
Worse now than ever before.
No, it's much better.
That's why it was endorsed by the sheriff of Ventura County.
Do your data on crime, because I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've got a question for you on
right
that.
here. It is much lower. It hit a almost all-time low in 2014. It's edged up very slightly since then.
Do you know anyone who actually lives here? Because what they will tell you is
everybody.
Hang on a second.
No.
What they'll tell you is that there's this explosion.
You weren't here in 1990. You weren't here in 1980.
That's right.
You weren't here in 1970. We had much higher crime rates than under Republican governors. Yes, there's crime now, but much higher under Republican governors.
I am here now, and I'm interested in the future, which most voters are when they come and cast their vote. And what they see is an absolute explosion in crime, in thefts, in robbery, in car crime, because of the bill, of the proposition that Governor Brown pushed through, which we're going to get to later, I think, which basically made it completely free of any criminal penalty for any theft under $950.
Exactly.
We have much lower crime rates now than we had under Deukmejian and Wilson because that's not true. You want to?
Not true.
Let me hold up the chart.
You know what they're good at? The Democrats are good at lying.
There's property crime, there's violent crime. Here are the statistics. As you can see, dropping when Governor Davis took over.
Right.
Now, I'm sure everybody here knows somebody who's a victim of a
prisoners
crime.
are coming out and in of prisons every single day because of the props that they're passing. They want more prisoners out than in prison.
By the way, there's another
Not
point.
about the
political
American people
spin.
believe.
Well, it's not. It's a political spin. It's people's accounts of their daily life. Which
Well, you
is
weren't here to hear the daily
no,
life.
today.
In
I'm talking about today. I'm talking
I
about
was.
today, right now.
I can tell you right
the election's about the future.
Let me jump in here. So not only do we have the greatest public university system, we have more Nobel laureates. We have.
Does the average American
Wait a
care
second.
about that?
Have you heard of Facebook? Have you heard of Apple?
Those
Have
things
you
are
heard of
wonderful, but
Twitter?
We're talking about
All of
average
those,
middle
all
class.
of those are located in California, and they
This
employ
state
lots
thrives
of people
as all states
who are
thrive
well
on the
educated.
middle class. When you destroy the middle class and you run them out, it doesn't matter how many great universities you have. At the end of the day, it's unaffordable for average people.
Governor Davis, I just want to ask you, why is it, though? There is a data. It is true that more people are leaving. I think
And business
coming in.
We lost 1 million workers and business owners in the last 10 years because of these guys. And we can't allow that to happen. We want people to come here, open business, pro-business, and be safe environments.
Who are you going to believe?
Against them,
we are out of time on
they
this.
have run this place.
Look at
in
the
Sacramento
census
for
numbers.
30 years into the ground.
I think
no more.
You're
no
making
mas.
these numbers up.
No, I'm not making them up.
I agree.
Believe
We'd be
me.
losing congressmen if that was the case. We're not.
I'm sure we'll continue to keep going during the break, but we have to take a break. Coming up, California has the nation's. These are facts. California has the nation's worst poverty, worst inequality, and worst homelessness. Why on earth would the Democrats want to inflict that on the rest of America? We'll debate it after the break. Welcome back, everyone. Democrats say they're the party that really cares about poverty. They've had complete control of California for a long time now. How have they done? Here's Anita Vogel with the facts.
Well, thanks, Steve. Despite low unemployment, a booming stock market, and a strong economy, poverty is still a growing problem in the U.S., especially here in California. According to the Census Bureau, the poverty rate, including the cost of living in the U.S., is 14.7%. In California, it's a whopping 20.4%. And while homelessness is growing across the country, up 1% between 2016 and 2017, nowhere is it more acute than California. Lawmakers here call it a humanitarian crisis. One of the most prominent havens is in downtown Los Angeles, a homeless community known as Skid Row, butting up against businesses and housing. People live openly there on the streets, in camps and tent cities. In 2017, on any given night in the U.S., more than 500,000 people were homeless. But most of them were in California, followed by New York, Florida, and Texas. In Los Angeles, the average home price is around $600,000. But experts say you have to earn over $100,000 a year to rent an average two-bedroom apartment. Adding to the problem has been a rise in crime in California neighborhoods. Some blame the release of more criminals onto the streets due to Proposition 47, a measure pushed by Governor Brown, reducing penalties for nonviolent, non-serious crimes, converting some felonies to misdemeanors. Critics say now drug addicts often escape punishment for crimes to support their habits. Any theft under $950, even if it happens during an armed robbery, may not be subject to jail time. Steve.
All right, thanks, Anita. Now, we talked about crime earlier. I don't want to go back into that, but there's so much else to explore here. Congressman, let's just get back to this question of whether California under Jerry Brown is a model for the rest of the country. It seems to me that there's another way of looking at it, which is it's an example of exactly what's gone wrong with the economy, in the sense that parts of California are booming. Silicon Valley, as Governor Davis has been saying. For those doing well, it's great. But there's so many people in California who've been left behind by this economy. And the Democrats have been in charge of the state for an awful long time.
The poverty rate in this country is $25,100 for a family of four. And unfortunately, 15.3% of Californians fall under that. But it's higher in Texas. It's 22% in Mississippi. It's higher in most of the Trump states. Now, it is true that housing is expensive here. But used cars, fresh produce, much less expensive. And of course, we spend nothing on home heating oil. So that $25,100 may be difficult to survive on. That is the poverty rate. Now, the main reason for problems is the high cost of housing, as was, and that's because we've had population growth. People vote with their feet, and the majority of American citizens have, every American citizen can pick which of the 50 states to live in. They choose California. That drives up our housing prices. It's because we have such a vibrant economy, because we have the science, the technology, and the colleges, that so many people are coming here, both immigrants, but we get more and more citizens born in the United States. We're the biggest state by far, and that puts a strain on the housing market.
Look, I would love to believe that's true. That's honestly, I love California. I love being here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world, just so everyone's clear. And that story of an open California is a great story, but it feels like that's not the reality.
No, the reality
for
is
so many working people today.
Yeah, our working Americans are on the streets right now, and we could take $23 billion that we're spending on immigration, and we can help our homelessness, especially the 10,000 that are living in downtown. But they're not doing anything about it. We have to step in, and that's why this November the Republican Party is going to step in and actually start budgeting things better and helping the American people.
Steve, there is good news. Homelessness in Los Angeles County and Los Angeles City are down over the last year.
Well, hang on
according
a
to
second. We've had quite a lot of trading
statistics that you're using to say it's high. They also say it's come down.
All right, let's not endless debate about statistics. I just think there's a general point, which is that right, but you know, I live close to San Francisco. I'm there. You know, it just feels really shaming. Those pictures we saw of the homeless encampments feel like they're from a third world country.
So I chair a business group with my predecessor, Governor Wilson, and 3 years ago we said our second highest priority was poverty. And the governor put in an unearned tax credit. He's given more money to schools in poorer districts. There's middle class tax credits. I mean, we do have a challenge, but if you are well educated, the sky's the limit in this state. The problem is not enough people.
Is more money the answer? I mean, a lot of people make the argument that actually the homelessness problem is a function, exactly as the Congressman was saying, of the housing problem. But that is something that for a long time now, the Governor Brown hasn't really done anything about. If you add to that transportation cost, the cost of living is just so unaffordable for people.
Well, housing is primarily a local issue, but let me give you some good news. Well, I was a veteran. I served in Vietnam, and I'm happy that 18% reduction in Vietnam homelessness, in part because the VA here in Westwood is accommodating homeless, and in part because of some efforts by the city and the county.
They got a lot of numbers, but I mean, it just doesn't feel true.
Has become a culture in California, and particularly in LA. I know because I moved here from Texas. I've never seen a place in